Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in our sort of studio in New York City. Joining me again is Richard Wolff. He's an economist at the New School, and we're talking about President Obama's plan for the economy. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thank you.
So in the last segment of our interview, we talked about your opinion that there was a need for a massive job program, as there was under FDR in the 1930s, thousands and thousands of people hired by the government. But in one way or the other, someone's going to have to pay for all this, whether it's a jobs program or Obama kind of stimulus program. So the question still remains, who's going to pay for it and how? So here's what President Obama said in his speech about this, because obviously there's going to be an enormous debt at the end of this road. And here's what he said he's going to do about that.
Yesterday, I held a fiscal summit where I pledged to cut the deficit in half by the end of my first term in office. My administration has also begun to go line by line through the federal budget in order to eliminate wasteful and ineffective programs. As you can imagine, there's a process that will take some time, but we have already identified $2 trillion in savings over the next decade. In this budget, we will end education programs that don't work and end direct payments to large agribusiness that don't need them. We'll eliminate the no-bid contracts that have wasted billions in Iraq and reform our defense budgets so that we're not paying for Cold War era weapon systems we don't use. We will root out the waste and fraud and abuse in our Medicare program that doesn't make our seniors any healthier. We will restore a sense of fairness and balance to our tax code by finally ending the tax breaks for corporations that ship our jobs overseas.
So in the end, the critique of this plan, whether it's a stimulus package, the way President Obama is saying, or a massive jobs program, is that in the end, you're going to be printing money to pay for it all, maybe borrowing more money. But one way or the other, the danger of hyperinflation as a result of all this. So how do you avoid that?
Well, at this point, it is clear to me that we're not going to avoid it because the decision has been made both by the Bush administration that is no longer there and now by the Obama administration as well, that the current crisis is so severe that we simply cannot worry about the longer-term future. And by longer term, I really only mean 2 or 3 years down the road, that we have to take steps now that are drastic, that involve massive government spending, and we really don't want to think about what the cost is. Now, on the one hand, that teaches everybody just how serious they think, those in power, this problem is. And I agree with them. They're right about that. I don't think it's safe to pretend that it isn't going to have severe effects. At this point, to be real simple, there are only 3 ways for the government to get the money to pay for all of these programs that are being talked about and have been passed now. The first one is to tax people to raise their money. They're not going to do that because that's counterproductive. If you raise taxes on people for the government to spend more, then the extra spending by the government is offset by the less spending of all the people you've taxed.
Well, he's saying he's going to tax people that make more than $250,000. Others are below $250,000, they're going to get a bit of a cut.
Right, but given the amounts of money involved, that would bring in a small fraction of the amount of money they're talking about spending. So while it may sound good and it shows that he's on the right side of things from many people's point of view, and that's all very nice, in terms of dealing with the magnitudes of what's being spent, that's just not very significant. The second way the government's going to get money is by borrowing it. That's how they've been doing it, and that's what they hope will happen. And underscore the word hope. This spending, they're going to need to borrow money because they're not going to raise anywhere near the amount of taxes. A, because that would require cutting out everybody else's ability to spend, and B, it would make Mr. Obama the most unpopular president in the shortest imaginable amount of time.
So what about taxing existing wealth, even if it's just a sort of emergency tax? But there's plenty of wealth in the United States to pay for these programs.
Right. But the way our politics works, even though the wealth is there, and by all means, that would solve the problem.
I mean, one could tax just the crazy profits made in the last 10, 15 years.
Exactly. And one could tax, the property in stocks and bonds that has never been taxed as a property in the United States' history and claim that that's long overdue. Yes, you could do that, but politically it's impossible. The way our political system works, those folks who also figured out this possibility have taken all the steps necessary for a long time to have a stranglehold on politics. And a politician who undertook to do that would be, in a sense, declaring war on all the people that have been in power in this society. And my guess is Mr. Obama is far from ready. Things may get to that point, but not yet. He plans on borrowing. We know that because his Treasury Secretary says so. Now that leads to the interesting question for Americans to think about. To borrow trillions of dollars, and our current deficit, that's what we're about to do, and we're already doing it. That involves two interesting things. One, who's going to lend the money to the United States government? The American people don't have it. They're not going to lend it. And the wealthy in America, they're pretty well tapped out too. They don't have a lot to lend. So we're likely going to have to borrow it from the people we've been borrowing from for the last 2 or 3 years, namely foreigners.
China.
And the lead foreigner is the People's Republic of China. They already have lent the United States, and the United States owes them in excess of $1.3 trillion. Do a little arithmetic. If they lend us $1.3 trillion, that means we have to send them now $40 to $50 billion a year in interest. It means that your viewers should be aware that every single American is paying taxes now, a portion of which the government collects for remission to the People's Republic of China to enable them to build up their military capacity, among other things. And if we're going to borrow more, there's going to be more of that going on. The debt that the United States is going to have to pay and carry, and the people who are the creditors and have the power that always goes with creditors, that's going to change global politics, it's going to change globalization, it's going to change the position of the United States. You may have to do these things in a rush to deal with the crisis, but it is very foolhardy not to have the American people aware of what they're getting into.
So what do you make of President Obama's plan to halve the deficit by the end of his first term? Is this realistic?
I'm going to try to be very polite. That is an attempt to say to the people who have some awareness that this is risky, that he's worried about that too. But there is no way he can stimulate the economy by spending a lot and at the same time spend less. That really is an attempt to say two opposite things at the same time.
So what is the alternative to this then? You're still advocating a stimulus program, whether it's a big jobs program or some other forms of government stimulus. It still has to be paid for.
Well, I, who don't have the responsibility that Mr. Obama does, have therefore the freedom to say things he can't, which I understand. But I would be interested in a wealth tax. I think that's very significant. I think the government should take over failing industries and make sure to preserve the jobs so that we don't have the cascading problem that an industry that fails lays off people, the people have no then income, they don't spend, which plunges other industries into distress. The reason you bring the government in to take over the industries and to do the employment is to prevent the market from operating as a kind of vehicle to spread a crisis from where it starts to everybody else. You have to get the government in there because there's no agency right now other than that can stop this hemorrhaging from going on. And the hesitancy of the government and the hesitancy of Mr. Obama to go further than he has is very dangerous because it risks us getting into a situation where we will be doing too little and it'll be too late.
So there's a lot of talk about these presidential phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. But instead of that, if you got a phone call from a working family in Detroit or Chicago or on the West Coast or in the South, I guess includes this crisis is affecting everyone now. What would you say?
On the immediate first level, they should be demanding work. They should be demanding the opportunity, if they're healthy adult human beings, to have a job that pays them the wherewithal to live properly, to raise their children. That's an immediate demand. That should not be postponed. That is more important, it seems to me, clearly on the grounds of morality and decency, but also economic effectiveness, that helping families immediately with the thing they need most, income and a job, is the first order of business. But I would also say, and I think the American people are more than ready to hear this, that something has to be done to reorganize how business is taken care of in this country. Having corporations in which the mass of people come to work at 9 and go home at 5, and a tiny group of people called the board of directors, it averages 15 to 20 people, making decisions. Those people made the decisions in the 70s to take advantage of history and stop raising wages, and the rest is our disaster. And I think they have shown that that's not an effective way to organize business. People at the top struggling against the mass of people, not paying wages if they can get around it. We have to reorganize business, understand how production is carried out. Otherwise, our economy, instead of serving us, will trip us up and destroy us as a nation. And it's time to ask those difficult questions. 6 months ago, no one in America could utter the word nationalization. Nowadays, everybody discusses it as if it were the most normal thing.
We had the cover of Newsweek a couple of weeks ago.
We're all socialists now.
You can actually use the word.
Right, and I would like to push that word a little further. Let's not just ask, should the government take over? Let's ask the even more daring question. Can we reorganize business so that the people who have everything at stake, which is the majority in every job, the working people who do the work, have a say in how this business gets run? We would have a very different society, and if the workers ran the businesses, they would not have stopped raising their own wages, they would not have substituted lending and borrowing for that. They would never have done that. No reasonable person would have. And we would have not gotten ourselves in this mess, and we should learn the lesson that that implies.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington, there's a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through the myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had this great speaking voice and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country's governed is going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said, in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists, only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.